Cześć, tu Mysza z podsłuchane.pl. Dzięki uprzejmości stacji AMC miałam ogromną przyjemność przeprowadzić krótki wywiad z Jacobem Andersonem, który w ich najnowszym serialu, Wywiad z wampirem, odtwarza rolę Louis de Pointe. Gorąco Was zapraszam do wysłuchania wywiadu.
Let the tale seduce you, just as I was seduced.
Hi Jacob, I'm Mouse.
Hello.
It's lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Mouse.
I hope I'm not keeping you up. You're not keeping vampire hours anymore.
No. It's pretty reasonable hours. It's like 4 o'clock. It's pretty
Thankfully.
good. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to take up too much of your sleep. I know it was precious during filming.
Sleep? What's sleep?
Well, it's something vampires probably never even heard of. Let's jump right in, if you don't mind. I want to start with like a softball question. You said in one interview that the show is a vibe. So my question to you is, how would you describe that vibe?
I'm never going to live that down. It's like, it was, that was a very reductive way to talk about a very complex show. I think there are different ways to discuss the show because there are two kind of parallel things running. I think that's why I said about describing it as a vibe, is because it's a difficult thing to like be linear about. But I'd say the show is the story of 143-year-old vampire Louis de Pointe, who 50 years earlier was interviewed by a young man named Daniel Malloy. 50 years later, in the present day, he decides to revisit their interview with new context. And in doing so, he kind of starts to break open things about his existence as a vampire that changes how he sees his own life. He's like, he starts to explore who he was as a young vampire, as a fledgling vampire. And I'd say that the show is a mix of things. I think it's a very difficult show to tonally pin down or to like say it's this thing or that thing, because I think it's a very existentially weighty show. I think there's a lot of feeling in it and a lot of love and a lot of passion, but then it's also incredibly dark and it's also funny sometimes. And we lean into the funny and it's camp and it's, I think it's all of these things. Again, hence vibes.
I mean, trust me, I totally agree because I'm in the Vampire Chronicles fandom on Twitter, and the analysis that the fans have, like, the show is so complex and so deep. Like, each episode is just a feast that you get to, like, continue eating. It's almost like a never-ending joy. So I completely get it. It is vibes. It's very vibes.
And by design, we wanted it to be vibes. Like,
Let's get into the complexity, because Louis is a very complex character and his identity is woven throughout the entire series. Like, he's a black man, he's queer, he's the family breadwinner, he's this constant caretaker that's both like burdened and trapped by his circumstance and this heavy guilt and shame and rage that he carries around. And my question to you is, do you truly think that Louis believed that becoming a vampire would solve all of those problems or like give him strength to deal with them? Or was that actually denial a bit?
No, I think that he did believe that it would change him, that it would change his life. I think it's almost like, this is obviously a very personal thing. It will mean something different to different people, but I almost feel like it's like somebody who survives something deeply traumatic and then have to live with that trauma for the rest of their lives. And I think that Louis truly sees vampirism as a second chance. I think he sees it as like, ultimately, this person who he has become deeply connected to, who he's never met anybody like Lestat. I'm sure not many people have met anybody like Lestat. And this person who he's connected to, it basically says to him, I see you for who you really are. And you're at this point where you're so overwhelmed by not knowing who you are anymore because of everything that you've had to pretend to be. I can give you the opportunity to unpack that stuff and to just be you, to forget about all of this stuff. And, Lestat talks about, the context of the time that they're in and like the society, I want to say the racist society that was, but is. And I kind of feel like that's something that you're not going to say no to. It's a second chance. It's a chance to essentially ignore everything that you were and just become what you are. Except that Louis is not somebody that sees life like that. He's not able to just pretend that everything that happened in his human existence didn't happen. He ends up getting preoccupied to the point of driving himself mad with this existential question of what am I and why am I?
The burden of existence, basically.
Yeah, he just becomes intensely human in becoming a vampire. I think that he truly believes that that's what he can do. I think it's almost like he could imagine it as, say there are 5 things about him as a human that are troublesome or torturous even for him. So there's being the brother, being the businessman, being the tough street guy, being this sort of society free man of color who used to be a part of a plantation family, being just a black man walking down the street, being a gay man, there are 6 things there. And I think that he maybe thinks of vampirism as a 7th thing. He's I can game this in the same way that I've gamed everything else. I think I could actually kill this as a vampire. I don't think that's where his head is at that moment. But
he's going to kill something.
Yeah. And he doesn't, Louis is also somebody that I feel like he never knew that he was loved. He's really connected to his brother and his sister, but I don't know if he feels loved by anybody. And Lestat says, I love you and I see you. And that's an incredibly enticing thing for anybody, much less somebody that doesn't feel that every day.
Yeah.
Not for who he really is.
You mentioned trauma, and that's very interesting to me because as we hear in the show, all vampires are made by trauma. But I also think it's interesting that the show came out when it did, and it's happening when it is during the pandemic, because that is a prolonged time of trauma for basically everyone in the world. And I find it so interesting that a show about vampirism, about what we said, the burden of existence, death, dealing with these big existential questions is coming out now. Because yes, stories about vampirism are timeless and Anne Rice's books are timeless. But the fact that the story is coming out now and that the showrunner, Roland Jones, decided to place it in this context is fascinating to me. And I'm curious, has it been discussed on set, this narrative framing that has been chosen?
The writing is so good, it's so rich, that a lot of things kind of don't really need to be discussed. They just are a part of it. It's just baked into what the story is. I think there are moments where Daniel calls out what's happening and he's like, okay, so now you're going to do this bit. Oh, now you're trying to do this. You're trying to move the story in this kind of way. You're trying to approach the narrative in a way that's going to make me feel a certain way. And I guess in a sense, that's a proxy for the audience. But I think that it's very rare that the show really pronounces sort of what it's saying. I think it just says it for the most part. And then you have those moments where Daniel's but no, so we didn't really talk a lot about kind of theme. I think we just played it. You know,
I think it's my fan brain just sort of trying to analyze everything, you know, how it is when you're a fan of something. I know you became a fan of the books. That's like Sam and I do that with the book, with like later books, like especially now, especially like reading. Like I read Queen of the Damned through to Merrick after the show. So I read Interview with the Vampire and The Vampire Lestat before we shot, and then I read the rest of them like immediately after. So which book are you on now?
I'm like at the end of Merrick. It's taken me a little while to read Merrick.
So you're in for a ride in Blood and Gold, because that's one of my favorite books.
Is that Marius's story?
It's Marius. It's wild. It's so rich.
Man, I loved Marius. in Queen of the Damned, I was like,
don't tell that to the fans.
I was like, oh, this guy seems like kind of interested in heroic, and the way that Lestat describes him. No, in The Vampire Lestat. And then just as I've gone on, I'm like, oh man, you are. I mean, I don't know. I don't.
Everybody in this series is a problem at certain times.
That's what I mean. Like we engage with the books in that way, and I am a pop culture hound. I can't watch anything without like deconstructing it bit by bit afterwards. So I completely understand that, that instinct. And it's how I felt reading this and reading the script. We just didn't talk about it like one-to-one a lot.
It brings me, and I know the fans, so much joy to hear that you're as big of a fan of the series as we are. So before we finish, I have a question, one fan to another. If like budgetary constraints weren't a thing, if you could have any scene, any sort of character from the later books to appear on the show, which one would you choose?
I have to be really careful. I mean, my favorite chapter of the entire Chronicles so far is The Devil's Minion. I'd love to see that. How you do that, I don't know, but I'd love to see that. So if we're just taking it outside of...
Like, I'm sure nobody from AMC is listening.
Like right now.
Yeah.
But I really want to do the stuff with Louis and Lestat and the body thief. I find so interesting in Taylor the Body Thief. I just find that so interesting. When Louis's like, no, I'm not gonna let you be a vampire again. That change in power dynamic I find very interesting. I'd love to do that with Sam.
It would be delicious to watch, and here's hoping. Jacob, thank you very much for talking to me, and I can't wait for fans in Poland to see the first episode of Interview with the Vampire on AMC on November the 7th, Lestat's birthday at 10 p.m.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Mouse.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks.
Take care.
Pierwszy odcinek Wywiadu z Wampirem możecie obejrzeć już 7 listopada o godzinie 22 na kanale AMC. Każdy kolejny odcinek będzie wyświetlany w poniedziałek o tej samej porze. A tego samego dnia, tutaj u nas na kanale, zapraszamy na odcinek podcastu Mysz omawiający premierowy odcinek Wywiadu z Wampirem.
He was my murderer, my mentor, my lover and my maker. It was as if I could finally receive the secrets of existence.
Your eyes, like a church window.
I was not yet ready to hunt, but desperate to feed.
It's best to let the food come to you.
You're not welcome in this home. This is how it has to be.
I don't want to kill people.
You're a vampire.
I could not save myself, but I could save her.
She'll be what? A daughter?
We're a family.
She is poisoning you against me.
You two have each other. Who am I supposed to love?
This is not a life! You took my life!
We'll be together 10,000 nights, 100,000.
Ready to begin the adventure of our lives. My companions in immortality.